AI looks backwards. It fundamentally understands whatever information you give it. It's a garbage in, garbage out situation. And not even necessarily garbage. It's context in, context out, right? If you give it information up until 2021, it will be able to provide you responses that are based upon the training data, right? It isn't going to be able to synthesize or make leaps in intelligence. It's not making a leap of intelligence. It is looking at patterns and synthesizing things from what it knows. It can't learn new things unless you tear it completely down and rebuild it with some caveats, which we can talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, one of the key pieces in what they talk about with these models is exactly that. You got to keep training them. And what's your
Yep.
training schedule going to be, right? How often do you need to retrain that NLP model? Obviously with ChatGPT, they were training new data sets, with larger and larger data sets so that the model could be more complete.
Right.
But once it gets to a certain completeness stage, and this is what happens with any model, you have to look at, what's its lifetime and what are people looking at and how often do I need to train based on that lifetime. Now, these large language models, training runs can be very expensive, right? We've helped
Yep.
Gen AI companies do training, and your training job could be, $50,000, $100,000 per training job. So, are you going to run that job every day? Probably not if you don't need it, right? So you're going to
Right.
really be looking at, hey, when do I need this new training, right? Should I run, once every quarter, once every 6 months? What am I really going to look at to make this work as well as possible, knowing some of those caveats? And in between, there are some things people are doing, to train with their own data sets that people have, right? Using, different forms of training that you have, right? You've got reinforcement learning that's kind of being done for some of the bigger
Yep.
models that can kind of show, hey, here's, they present an answer and then you say, yes, the answer was correct, or no, the answer wasn't correct, right? And
Right.
so that's one of those systems that's kind of built into place with a lot of these models right now is that reinforcement learning and trying to add, additional knowledge to it as it's going along. But there's so much information that's created every day that, I don't know the army of people you would need, entering information into
Right.
to make that work. So you're always going to have, gaps in the knowledge of these large language models as you're going along, just because of the training that you need to use.